Welcome back to Inclusive Design 24, brought to you in partnership with Barclays Access, the Paciella Group, Intopia, Microsoft Edge, and Open Access Technologies. Don't forget you can subscribe to Inclusive Design 24 on YouTube and just hit the subscribe button. And don't forget to follow ID24Conf on Twitter. And if you have questions, please tweet them using the ID24 hashtag, and we'll ask them at the end of the session.
I would like to also say a hello to everybody joining us from right now, apparently across the Americas. We have a number of ID24U sessions going on live now with people hopefully all gathered around a screen and watching. First is at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, Massachusetts. We've also got in Ottawa, Ontario in Canada. It sounds like we have a group of people gathered in Tufik Spetti's office. And I apologize, Tufik, if I've mispronounced your name. We have in Ann Arbor, Michigan, University of Michigan attendees. The Nebraska Digital Accessibility Meetup is joining us from Lincoln, Nebraska. Northern Arizona University Disability Resources is joining us from Flagstaff, Arizona. And finally on my list, we have University of the Pacific Center for Teaching and Learning coming in from Stockton, California. So thank you all for attending. We look forward to your participation and questions. And then from that, I would like to turn it over to our presenter. We have Andy Bell, and he's going to talk about the power of progressive enhancement. So it's all you, Andy.
Thank you. Cheers. So, hey everybody. My name's Andy, and first up, I just want to say thanks to everyone at ID24 today for putting so much hard work to put together such a cool event. And there's been some really good talks today, so hopefully if you've missed any, go back and check them out. There's so much to learn from so many smart people, and I feel really lucky to be included in the list. So to start off with an introduction about myself. I'm a designer and front-end developer from the United Kingdom. And I've got about 10 years experience now working with both in agencies and in product teams. And over that time, I've been lucky enough to work with some pretty big organizations like Harley Davidson, the National Health Service, Sky, and Oracle. But more important than that, I'm big fan of accessibility and progressive enhancement. I think it's something that's super important that we got to get right, because it's something that I think is forgotten. And me being into this stuff means that I'm technically swimming against the tide in the front end world. And hopefully this talk and other talks today will help change that a little bit. So the main reason I care so much about accessibility and progressive enhancement is one main thing, and that is people. Because it's people who we build our websites and our apps for. It's not our Twitter followers, it's not our Hacker News readers, our Dribble followers. And this is often forgotten. And working for people is the core value for progressive enhancement methodology. And I know I reference people a lot in this talk because it's so important that we don't forget who we build for. So first up, let's have a look at why we want to work with progressive enhancement and why it's so important. And I'll start with the first thing, and this is super important in my opinion. Fast, reliable internet is a luxury and it's not the standard. Now, this is often forgotten, I think, and I think this comes down to a lot of the industry being based out in the States and, the Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the VC-funded startups. A lot of the work on the web are working on really high-performing computers and with really high-quality internet connections. Now, I'm going to show you stats about some average internet speeds. And these are from developed countries. Remember that developed countries are often Western countries, but these figures might surprise you a little. So I've picked three. So we've got Italy, France, and Australia, and 10.2 meg, 10.8, and 11.1. Now, these are the average connection speeds for these countries. Now, I've got to point out that France, in the middle, is the largest economies in the world, and they're pulling in 10.8 megs as their average connection speed. And for context on that, 3G is about 7 megs. So France is only just above that. So 3G is the average speed on mobile phone data plans. So it's not the fastest, but it's not super slow. And you're probably surprised at that because I think there's a perception that developed countries have fast average connection speeds, but even the UK here I am today, in rural areas, people are pulling in some seriously slow speeds. But again, we're still shipping some super large websites and webs. So let's move on. And let's have a look at some average internet speeds for developing countries. Now, these figures are probably what you're more expecting, where we've got some super low numbers. But I picked these three deliberately. Paraguay being 1.4. Now, that's because it was the lowest I could find. I think it's an excruciatingly slow connection. And then Nigeria is probably one of the fastest growing tech things, and they're in 3.9 megs on average. Now, I imagine a developer in Nigeria is probably super aware of connection speeds versus someone who's based in San Francisco, for example. And lastly, India, 6.5 megabytes a second. India being one of the heaviest populated countries in the world. Now, some of you probably noticed that all three of those come under the 7 megabits a second, average 3G. So with those speeds, we've got to talk about the average size of a website as well, a web page in this instance. Now, this is from the HTTP archive report, and at the time of speaking, it is currently about 1526 kilobytes. That's pretty much. And just sit and think about that. These poor people in Paraguay who are trying to pull in these huge sites, especially when you consider the limited packets, you've got DNS delays, you've got latencies. All these things add up to a super slow, frustrating experience. But this isn't a talk about performance. It's certainly not direct anyway. But I think it's important to cover these base figures because I think you can improve performance with progressive enhancement. And that should come as no surprise. And I'll explain how we can improve performance along with the most important thing in my opinion, which is user experience with progressive enhancement. So let's change tangent a little bit and talk about devices. So one thing that might come as a bit of a surprise to Western audience especially is that the average smartphone looks like this. This is a mid-range Android smartphone, probably a couple of £100 worth of phone. Now, and I've been guilty of this myself, is a lot of developers will test their mobile performance on a iOS device or an iOS simulator. Now, that I think gives you a bit of a skewed idea of how your website, web app performs. So, and the thing that's often forgotten with this is that Android has around a 70% market share. And today, currently, that's about 73, 74%. That's nearly 3/4 of the mobile market is powered by Android. Yet, it's often forgotten when we're testing. And so, another thing that's done as well is that a lot of people browse the web without JavaScript enabled. And one misconception is people browse the web without JavaScript because they don't like it, or they have some sort of opinion about JavaScript, or otherwise that JavaScript is blocked off because they're working on a corporate environment with Windows XP. And although these things are true, there's some other things that are that I want to talk about where JavaScript might not be working for other reasons. So one thing that I think is super common, and this can happen on any device, no matter how much money on it, how good your internet connection is, and that is there's a runtime in the JavaScript. Now, JavaScript is an incredibly fragile language, and it breaks so disgracefully at any given point. But as an industry, we bet everything on it, as we do. So a lot of things can break your JavaScript code than the code itself. And those things can be external plugins that you use in its dependencies, or a user's browser extension affect the JavaScript, or a tracking code from your favorite analytics service. So you get the idea. What I'm saying is that, JavaScript not working isn't purely down to taste or network or company regulations. Another thing that might prevent JavaScript working is that a user might be using it as the ultimate ad blocker. And I've seen this a few times where people just straight up disable JavaScript by default on a website until they can determine that they trust it. And obviously a lot of advertising and tracking comes via JavaScript. So it is a good, effective way of preventing these things by default. It's quite a clear approach, but I've seen it happen. And then recently as well, the last one is if your user's running Android on a 2G connection with data saver enabled, it won't work by default JavaScript. It won't run anything whatsoever. The operating system will prevent it from happening. It shows the user an option to enable the JavaScript, yeah, but by default, the JavaScript will run. And the first thing that when I read about this was I thought, how many React-powered apps are out there where the only HTML element within the body is a div with an ID of root? And there's absolutely nothing else there. Now, how are they going to perform in these environments? And I think we all know that's pretty shoddy. So a little takeaway there at this point in the talk is to maybe just consider that having that empty div as your default element is probably not the best thing, and they don't everything in JavaScript. So back onto progressive enhancement, I want to talk about something that I've started using as a methodology, and that is the minimum viable experience approach. I was wondering, what the heck is that? So I've got a bit of a diagram for you. So this diagram is more often used to describe a minimum viable product when people talk about product design stuff. And the crux of it is basically that instead of trying to build the best thing and doing a terrible job in the run up to that best thing being delivered, you build slowly with a minimum approach. So you deliver a smaller but working experience, and then you enhance on that. You enhance it further and then enhance it again. So in the example in this diagram, we've got a single wheel at the top, followed by 2 wheels and a chassis, then the car with no engine or windows, and then finally, right at the end, after that frustration, there's a working car. But with progressive enhancement, you provide a skateboard, and then you enhance that and give them a micro scooter, which gives you a spin, and then you enhance that again, give them a cycle, and then right at the end, you give them a nice motorized scooter. Now, deliberately a scooter there because what I'm trying to show there is that often with progressive enhancement, what you deliver is lighter than if you downgrade the experience for poorer connections and browsers. And it's worth noting as well that often we create poor experiences by building down. It makes sense to build up instead to give yourself a bit more resilience. With that, providing the most possible value to a user with the least possible technical capability. So a user on that Android phone we've seen in the previous slides can come along to your app and they might see a degraded experience. All right, to them, they'll see an experience which is better than no experience if For instance, you've got an empty div with an ID of root for your React app. So let's have a look at a quick example of what I'm talking about. So this little example here is a progressively enhanced toggle panel. Now, when I'm looking at this frame as a still, you can see we've got a heading, a bit of a summary text, and then a subheading with some body underneath it. So if a user lands on this site, this is what they see by default. This is minimum viable experience. We've got semantic content, which is great. That's what we want. But then when I play this, you'll see I enable JavaScript in this. It converts it into a JavaScript-powered toggle panel using the exact same content, using web components, which we'll come on to later. I want to create and enhance the experience for the user, which is a really crude way of showing the minimum viable experience. But you get the idea what I'm going at here, I hope. And in this example, priority is the content, which is delivered immediately. And the fancy interaction doesn't have to work for the user to get any value. And that's great, because the user will never know that we're supposed to see the fancy toggle panel. They'll never know that we even existed. The only people that will know that never been really used are designers and developers. And that's great, because that uses more the minimum viable experience. And we're prioritizing any level of functionality, and the key is any versus the best level of functionality. Instead of building and throwing all the bells and whistles at it, and by default, we're enhancing instead. And it just provides a super resilient experience. So we talk about progressive enhancement on Twitter and such, and you get all sorts of responses back. And I talked about it in agency environment as well. And this, I've fabricated a quote of which is a sort of amalgamation of some of the responses I've had in the past. And this one always crops up. The users need to see the exact same experience in every browser. And I've cited this as someone in marketing, probably. And this is an old chestnut. Been fighting this battle for as long as I've been working in the web. And as an industry, and myself previously included, we've infatuated with the concept of pixel perfect displays for every browser. And as Jeremy Keefe suggests in his Resilient Web Design book, it's in fact collective consensual hallucination. And it's an artifact of the PSD to HTML desktop only era of web design. Another ones you might see on Twitter when people mention progressive enhancement is, can't possibly do that with my complex JavaScript application, cited as some tech bro, probably. And this is a made-up quote, but it's a common result to progressive enhancement online. And to be fair, it's probably true. And the main reason for this is I think progressive enhancement is actually a mindset change. So what we're doing is we're changing the way we work from day zero on a project, constantly thinking about how we can enhance an experience rather than just focusing on the enhanced experience. So, and the beauty of this approach is that the JavaScript might not actually get to be too complicated because we're starting simple and we're always thinking how we can keep things as simple as possible. And I think that's great. So a block of text warning coming up. I think it's important to mention. I'll read this out as well. Progressive enhancement isn't necessarily more work. It certainly isn't a non-JavaScript fallback. It's a change in how we think about our projects. A complete mindset change is required here, and it starts by remembering that you don't build websites for yourself. You build them for others. And this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the talk. We build for people. We don't build for our peers. We build for the people that use sites. So that's an important quote there. One way we can do this is by embracing the web platform. Now, the reason why there's a snowman emoji there is because there's a serious lack of emojis. So that is why he's hanging out there. And so one really effective way we can do this is focus on the modern tools that have been given to us for free. And this includes web component CSS. And the beauty of these is that we're not having to call these external dependencies that we've gotten all to do, because they're all built into the browser by default. And browsers are super powerful now, especially compared to even 2 or 3 years ago. And that's great. It means we're having to reinvent functionality. It's there, it exists, it's accessible. It's great. And you know what it also means too is we earn ourselves some resilience points, because we're pulling on fragile dependencies. We're actually using what's built into the browser. Again, a simple setup. So we're not configuring our Webpack files, and we're not chasing down dependency mismatches. Instead, we're focusing on what's important, and that's the user experience. And keeping things simple, focusing on accessibility. All these important things that often get pushed aside in favor of configuring a complicated toolchain. I'm not saying you shouldn't use frameworks though, because frameworks do provide value. What I am saying is use frameworks with balance instead. Pick a framework when you need to use them. You know, if you've got a complicated application, it's got tons of logic, tons of state management that's required, yeah, you're going to have to use a framework for sure. Reinventing the wheel with vanilla JavaScript at that point is probably going to be detrimental. But if you've a very simple application, you don't need to use a framework, probably. So it's worth just considering at that point, do you actually need to use them? I can totally have your fancy framework like React, for instance, and progressive enhancement too. It's just a lot more difficult to implement that mindset with a framework like React than it is using the tools that we get for free from the browser. So you might be asking, what free tools are these that you're talking about? And I'm going to pick two, and two that I've been focusing a lot. And for those who follow me on Twitter, probably know exactly what tools these are, and they're web components and CSS. So I'm going to just show you another fabricated quote that I've made up. This has also been said before on Twitter, I must say. Not all browsers support web components. That person on Twitter, it's the same person that will tell you a new fancy CSS is defunct because it's not supported in IE. Yeah, this is common. But remember, we're talking about progressive enhancement. No fallbacks in this setup, because we don't need to, because we're using web components as the enhanced experience. We're using modern CSS the enhanced experience. And for some QAs and front-end developers screaming at this point. But let's get back on track and look at this example that we were looking at earlier. Now, this progressively enhanced toggle panel. Again, let's run through the functionality. We've got the title and summary, but then the enhanced area, this subheading and body, by default, is rendering as you see it. Just nice semantic HTML. Now, this is actually using a web component, and if there's no JavaScript turned on, or if web components are supported, this is what you see, because HTML is declarative. So it'll just continue trying to render away, doing its best job, which is great. Same with CSS. And actually, where the web component is supported and the JavaScript is enabled, the named slot system that you get with web components is just, for lack of a better word, the content that I provided it from the outside, and then it's reformed it to be this toggleable web panel, which is great. And as I just mentioned, then the component, it's enabling our minimum viable experience because it's a native browser feature as well. So I just created a custom element and then I've stuck my content in there. Great. It's totally native and it's working really well. And an important thing to point out there as well is that example actually worked in IE8, which is, and I've done 0 fixes, I've done 0 hacks. It works because of the minimum experience. It's working in IE8, and this is a screenshot of that in action on browser stack. Yeah, it doesn't look great. I'll be honest, it'd be nice to be able to clamp those line lengths and, add some padding in there, and that could be doable. And we could, with some better CSS written, we could make it look even better in IE8. And technically, this would actually work in IE6 too. And the reason why I haven't given you an IE6 screenshot today is because who's got time to be wrangling SSL issues in Windows XP at this given time? But yeah, I've got to mention again, there's no fixes in there. I've just shipped the same code to every single browser, and they're all doing their best work, get the best experience for the user. And by that, we're producing a resilient front end by default. We're not using defunct packages like the auto prefixer, which is becoming more and more useless as time goes. We're not shipping heavy libraries like jQuery, which is great and it's done amazing work for the web, but it's probably not required now with the scope of browsers that we have. But let's not talk too much about JavaScript. I think we talk too much about JavaScript in this industry. Let's talk about favorite language, CSS. Now, progressive enhancement with CSS requires a bit of planning. And that's the same with all CSS. It's always good to start and think about how you can implement CSS features to generate the layouts and the styles that you want to generate. So let's look at a really simple example. I've got myself a 3-column, 2-row grid. Now, the first thing we've got to do now in this planning phase is what is our minimum viable experience of this grid? So I think it's this. It's a stacked 4 boxes on top of each other. Now, obviously, there's the other boxes as well if you use a scroll, but say you can see these 4 by default. And one is a given max width, which is really well supported. And I've added some margin between each one, which again is supported by every browser. And content is easy to consume and it's easy to navigate. I've controlled areas that I can control default. It's great. It's working really well. That's our minimum viable experience. It's nice and solid. So that's the job done for 16% of the global users that don't have CSS grid support. So the obvious question there next is, well, what are the other 84% of the users? How are we going to support them? Well, I touched on it earlier, but CSS being declarative, this to this into the same code. So there's 3 lines of CSS, and that'll give us a fully responsive grid with a nice 1 roughly 16 pixel margin between each block. And that's our blown experience. And all we've added is those 3 lines of code. And then where browsers support CSS grid, it'll take it on and start rendering grid as we see it there. If not, we've got that nice stacked setup instead, which is great. Just for interest, this is the full code of that example. It's pretty cool, right? Really small, really slim. And then I'm going to show you this code. It's an important point that I want to make is that I think we need to start heavy-duty CSS frameworks away. I think they've done incredible work in enabling some really cool innovations at a time where browser support was really fragile and people were struggling to get their heads around responsive web design. But we're so far along the line with that, and CSS has come on so much thanks to the hard work of the CSS working group and developers as well, pushing for features. CSS Grid, Flexbox, we've got power now with layout. So I think frameworks, and I'll have to name one, Bootstrap being the main one. Maybe it's time to start putting those ones. And I think progressive enhancement actually, as the same with JavaScript, will result in tiny amounts of CSS because we're using these really nice tools like CSS Grid now, which allow you to do so much with so little code. And embracing the progressive enhancement. So we're not writing tons and tons of CSS with hacks and backwards compatibility. We're just writing progressive CSS, which is how CSS is supposed to be written. Then we're all winning at the end of the day. I think we should embrace that approach. And I mean all of us at that point as well. let's touch on what else we can do to embrace progressive enhancement. And I think we should be making progressive enhancement part of every process in the entire team. So I'm not talking about just development design. I'm saying it should be in the planning phase of project, user experience design phases, the design phases, development and testing. I know these lines are blurred, and for me, they're often very blurred. But keeping this approach back of your mind at all times during these phases is super helpful. You should always be asking yourself this question: what is the minimum viable experience, and how can we enhance on it? And I think that is a good way to get buy-in from key stakeholders and decision makers too, because it's a very simple question to keep asking. What is the minimum viable experience? How can we enhance it? If you work in an agency environment, don't let the client force your hand here as well. You've got to remember they're paying you as an expert. So show them the benefits of this approach, prove to them how it works, and still listen to them as well. Get them asking themselves, what is the minimum viable experience and how can we enhance it? And always remember, I touched on this earlier in the talk, but I want to mention it again because I think this is really important. We need to always remember the priority is the people that use our websites. It's not ourselves, it's not Twitter peers, it's not Drupal users. It's developer convenience. Yeah, it is important, but only if it frees us up to focus on our users. If we're spending our time focusing on tools, frameworks, and hotness, we're not doing our jobs properly. We're focusing on the wrong things. We're avoiding what's important. Focusing on those things. It's all good, but happy users are so much better. You always got to remember, a user doesn't care how your thing was built. They're never going to care how your thing was built. And that goes for if it's working and if it's not working. They don't care if you built it with React and Apollo and GraphQL. They don't care. All they care about is achieving what they want to achieve when they land on your website or web app. So always keep that in your mind too. Always remember that. I think we focus on our own things too often in this industry, and yeah, something we need to change. I think we're to the end now, so let's have a little bit of a recap of points we've covered in this talk. So, most important, people are our main priority. Always remember that. It's the people that are our priority, and this goes with, and it's a good day to say that because we're an accessibility focused conference. Accessibility is a very user focused practice. So I'm already preaching to the converted, I imagine, but that's an important point. And ditch the fallbacks, ditch the hacks and the heavy frameworks if you can. And I'll say if you can, because I touched on it earlier as well. If you ditch the frameworks and it's actually going to make providing a good experience for the user difficult, then it's counterintuitive. So ditch the heavy frameworks if you can. Embrace the minimum viable experience. Again, going back to what we said earlier, keep asking yourself, what is the minimum viable experience and how can we enhance on it? And create a resilient, user-focused experience, considering the people that are using your apps as always. And then finally, with the approach, you can sleep easy knowing that your website or app just works. Thanks to progressive enhancement, thanks to the modern tools that we're given free by browsers, nice resilient front ends that just work. And that's that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. That was really good.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions on Twitter. Adrian, is that right?
I do not see questions on Twitter, but we do have questions coming in from other channels.
Oh, okay.
So
Cool.
I have one here. Andy, what is your opinion of the term vanilla JavaScript? Pretend I put air quotes around that, as a way to describe the way JavaScript always used to be and maybe should be written?
That's a good question. So vanilla JavaScript is JavaScript with frameworks, the pure form of JavaScript. But I actually think it's it is a helpful way of describing it, because the focus of JavaScript development has become very framework oriented over the last 10 years or so. So yeah, I think, yeah, as we all know, vanilla JavaScript is JavaScript, but I think it helps with one thing that's which is search. So when people are trying to find a vanilla JavaScript approach to something, that's especially useful for people who are learning as well. So I'm quite a big fan of the term, and yeah, it's just JavaScript, the best type.
Yeah. Vanilla's delicious. I don't know why it's seen as a bad thing.
It is.
It goes in everything. It makes everything better.
It does.
It's like salting passwords in vanilla JavaScript. You've got a good system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, terrible metaphor. Sorry.
Anything else?
I have seen nothing else come in. I'm just giving it another refresh to see if anything new has popped up.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll indulge in a question of my own.
Yeah, go for it.
Obviously, we always talk about progressive enhancement, or almost always talk about progressive enhancement as being a technical issue. But as with the progressively enhanced scooter, these are also design and UX decisions. Do we need to be pushing this conversation further back in the usual workflow of designing and developing sites and components?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it needs to be considered at the earliest point of the project. One of the earliest things you probably do is the user research, and you might start researching the concepts that you're considering. At that point as well, you need to start thinking about progressive enhancement. When you're wireframing, you're sketching, you're sticking post-it notes on the wall, or whatever you do in your process. You're sitting in the boardroom talking to clients. I think at every point, enhancement needs to be there, because it's in those boardroom meetings and it's in these phone calls where these bad decisions can often get made. A rather bullish character, for instance, who will declare that a carousel is required on the homepage, for instance. No, it probably isn't. So if you think of minimum viable experience, for me, that is display none on that thing by default, and only showing it where the optimal conditions are met. And it's reinforcing this. And again, another point I want to make is that in my experience in agencies is that a lot of the heavy work happens at the end of the project, when clients get up that something doesn't look right in IE8 or whatnot, and at that point the conversation needs to be had that progressive enhancement is the focus, therefore to be not rolling in heavy hacks at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that situation, setting the expectations for the client as well, even at the point where you're signing a contract, if they're expecting this pixel perfect layout with functionality in a 15-year-old browser, then they're only going to be disappointed. So
yeah, and a point on that as well is that so often in these proposal and contracts is that cringeworthy bullet list of supported browsers that is effectively outdated the second it's pen's met paper. It's that sort of practice that we can just get rid of and have a more modern approach to these things.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So we have another question that I think builds on that a little bit. What do you say to critics of progressive enhancement who insist that it isn't a necessary thing to worry about these days, especially in the era of constantly updating web browsers?
All right, 3 words: check your privilege, because you're focusing on the wrong things. The important thing is people, and as I mentioned earlier in the talk, look at the connection speeds, look at the computing power that the developer has. The focus does need to be on creating an experience for these people. It doesn't need to be on evergreen browsers. Evergreen browsers provide us with a golden path to making cool things, for sure. But we've also got to be considerate of the wide net of users that are using our websites with low devices on connections. So yeah, check your privilege.
I kind of like that. Good 3-word answer.
Yeah, well, it turned into a lot of words, but yeah, that's the TLDR. Check
you had to justify it so we can make the argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. I don't see any other questions coming in.
Okay, then. Well, all that remains is to thank you so much, Andy, for that great talk. If you liked this session, and surely you did, please hit the like button, and also please subscribe to the Inclusive Design 24 channel. I believe we are a mere 6 subscribers away from our target of 600 for this event. So please,
I'll tell you
please
what,
do
I'll
subscribe.
make myself one of those.
Well, there you go.
Awesome.
That's 1 down, 5 to go. Thank you. So a reminder, Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you in partnership with Barclays Access, the Paciello Group, Intopia, Microsoft Edge, and Open Access Technologies, and with thanks to our sponsors, DQ Systems. We'll be back on the hour. We have Kathleen McMahon, who's going to talk about accessibility flavored React components, which I think is a good talk to follow this one on. If you're going to be creating complex components, then make them accessible. So until we are back, thanks again, Andy, and we'll see you very soon.
No worries.
Cheers.